Don't be fooled by the name. Neutron's exciter is not just a traditional exciter that adds a little high-frequency edge to signals. It's really a very flexible, general-purpose distortion saturation effect with no less than 4 different modes for generating harmonics to subtly enhance the audio. Once again, I'll start off with the exciter in single-band mode at first for an initial look at its options and controls. Most of the action is down in the bottom area where you see the XY grids. The drive and blend sliders are pretty self-explanatory. Drive pushes the exciter for a stronger effect. This would be set to taste. And blend mixes the dry and process signals together. The setting for this one might depend on the type of saturation you've dialed up. And that's where the grid comes in. The exciter offers 4 different saturation types. The strongest effect will be had in tube mode, which, as you'd expect, emulates analog tube drive. As I initially demo these modes, I'll set the blend to 100% effect and crank up the drive at first for each mode so you can clearly hear the effect. And then I'll dial down to more appropriate levels. So here's tube mode. Tape mode, naturally, models the softer compression and saturation characteristics of analog tape, which emphasizes odd harmonics. With many of these modes, I'd be inclined to set the blend control to a mix of dry and effect, but with tape mode, if you really wanted the sound of audio recorded onto analog tape, you might also want to try the blend all the way up at 100% effect. You can probably get away with dialing up a stronger effect with tape mode than with tube mode. Retro mimics the sound of transistor saturation, bringing its own distinctive quality. Finally, warm is said to be similar to tube, but designed to generate only even harmonics. Even harmonics usually provide a softer, warmer, more subtle saturation quality. Going around the grid clockwise, it seems that the effect gets more subtle, and if you're auditioning the different options, you might want to dial up more drive and saturation as you go from tube to tape to retro to warm for a more useful comparison. But besides simply providing 4 saturation options, Neutron's transient shaper goes you one better. Via the XY grid, you can combine the saturation modes. This would be typical of what you'd get if you were working in the analog domain and signals were passing through multiple processors, each adding its own distinctive flavor of saturation, or excitement. There are a couple more controls. A low-pass filter is provided via a node in the display. This acts only on the processed saturated signal, not on the dry signal. So if you're blending dry and processed signals via the blend slider, you can reduce the brightness and grittiness of the saturation effect without dulling down the original audio. This will let you dial up a stronger saturation effect for much more desirable warmth without the excessive edginess of the higher saturation harmonics. Now you could, say, dial up a thicker sound on the drums in a full kit without adding too much graininess to the cymbals. Of course, the best way to exert this kind of more specific control is to enable multiband operation. Once again, you have the familiar per-band on-off bypass, and solo buttons. And just as with the other multiband processors, you can drag the crossover frequencies in the display to fine-tune the saturation being applied to each band. Now you can selectively add different types of saturation to different frequency ranges. Once again, a full drum kit is a good way to show this. I could dial up a stronger level of tube saturation in the low frequency range, adding a little bite to the kick. And a more subtle tape saturation effect could be applied to the highs, giving the cymbals a nice presence without too much extra dirt. Finally, up top there are 3 modes labeled Full, Defined, and Clear, which subtly affect the overall character of the saturation, as per their descriptions. Next up, I'll move over to the output section of the plugin for a look at Neutron's limiter.